measures to effectively communicate the direction of the agency and ensure alignment with best and next practices. Nick has served the state of Georgia since 2009 and has worked at the Department of Community Supervision since its inception in 2015. Prior to his career at DCS, he worked for the Department of Juvenile Justice and the Department of Corrections. Among his professional accomplishments, he is also a member of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, the Alliance for Community and Justice Innovation, the American Society of Criminology, the American Sociological Association, the American Probation and Parole Association, and the Georgia Professional Association of Community Supervision. Nick holds a doctorate in sociology from Georgia State University, a master's degree in public administration from Columbus State University, and a bachelor's of science in criminology from the University of West Georgia. He is a post-certified instructor, defensive tactics instructor, crisis intervention team facilitator, and has completed the University of Georgia's grant writing program. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nick Powell.
Thank you, Elaine, for that kind introduction, and thank you all for making it over here after lunch. I know this is one of the more challenging sessions, so if you need to stand up and move around to get your blood flowing, no hard feelings. But I appreciate you being here. And I appreciate Elaine reading my bio, but I haven't always been over strategic planning and research. I started my career out as a juvenile probation officer. And after a couple years of getting my heart broken, I decided to transfer down the street to work for the adult probation office. And I won't forget my first day. I got there, my boss, because I already had some case management experience, escorted me to my office, pointed to a file cabinet, and told me to have at it. So I'm still naive and excited, right? So I start thumbing through the files to familiarize myself with who I'm going to be working with. And I quickly made a pretty alarming discovery. What do you think it is?
Some of the kids that you dealt with.
So you work in juvenile justice, so I knew you were going to know that. So yeah, about every fifth or sixth name belonged to someone I recognized, right? It was the kids on my juvenile caseload, all grown up at 17. It was their parents, their siblings, their neighbors, and even their mentors. So this moment fundamentally changed how I view the world. Right then I realized that crime is not a simple matter of personal choices or character traits. It's a series of events and circumstances that shape the individual story of a person's life. So this is why I've dedicated my professional career to studying the social context in which crime occurs. By understanding these subtleties, I hope to be part of strategies and solutions that not only improve criminal justice outcomes, but also reduce some of the negative consequences of being involved in our legal system. Now, this is my why. It's very unique to me. I share it with you to share the importance of reflecting on what motivates you. Because we're talking about forming strategic collaborations between practitioners and research partners. We got to know what each other are about. So can I have 2 volunteers? I promise it'll be really easy. Thank you. All right, thank you. I got 2. Okay, will you 2 please stand up? And I'm going to let you go first, since we've already got warmed up a little bit. So all I want you to do is I want you to answer 3 questions, so you get a chance to think about yours. Who you are, what you do, and why you do.
Who I am?
Yep. It's on your name tag.
Metaphysical. No, I'm Eric Cornelier, Director of the Washington State Caseload Forecast Council. What was the second question?
What you do, you just answered it.
Okay.
So why do
I do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Aside from getting paid, no, it's better than that. Partly just because I really enjoy it. I did debate in high school and college and wanted to get involved in public policy after that, and never thought budgeting would be interesting or any of the quant side of it. But then when I actually got into government after grad school and law school, I found it was the most exciting and interesting part of it. And this office that I'm in now is, to me, the perfect wedding of public policy and quantitative methods. I enjoy it. So
very cool. Thank you very much, Eric. So, okay, you'll give him a round of applause. Okay, yours should be really good.
All right, so My name is Justin Sean. I am a statistician in the Office of Immigration Statistics at the Department of Homeland Security. I am the team lead for our migration forecasting effort, and really my whole career has revolved around researching and modeling migration. And I really do that really kind of as the culmination of a series of events and insights that kind of started from a study abroad experience when I was in South Africa and in the middle of a lecture where the professor brought up that the Rwandan genocide had some really important roots in the failure to properly respond to the refugee crisis that had taken place several decades earlier. And that was one of those things that I didn't have a personal experience with migration to think about, but I remember that it just clicking with me that this migration thing seems really important to understand and think through. So that kind of stuck with me, and my interest kind of kept growing from there.
Very cool. Thank you, Justin. Okay, so thank you so much, Eric and Justin, for doing that. I promise there won't be any more of those exercises. But I think it's a good way to start demonstrating what I like to refer to as professional identity. Okay? We often underestimate the importance of identity, but it's what motivates our actions, organizes our choices, and brings meaning to our professional lives. So if we're talking about forming strategic collaborations between practitioners and academics, you got to know who you're working with, right? Like I just felt like I got one step closer to being able to work with Eric and Justin. Okay? Eric likes variety and feels like he has a really good team. He seems very confident in the team that he works around. That's a good thing to know. That's what Eric's bringing to the table. And you're talking about conviction and compassion and empathy and how you're affected by this experience. That's your professional identity that you're bringing to the team. So knowing what we're about is how we can start bridging those gaps between theory and reality when we work together, as opposed to some of the pitfalls we step into where practitioners assume that academics are magic and they can snap their fingers and give us all the answers, or academics assume that practitioners can just implement any kind of initiative overnight, right? But guess what? Agencies have identities as well. So typically we're not going to work together, just me and Justin. It's going to be his organization versus my organization. So we know what we're about personally, but we also got to bring into the fold what our agencies are about. And you find this out by what their mission, vision, and values are, right? Why they exist, where they're going, what they stand for. So forming strategic collaborations require gaining a deep understanding of what the two agencies working together are about, so that we can start closing that gap between theory and reality. So the purpose of our presentation today is we're going to provide a general overview of my work, which is person-centered supervision. Sorry, I'm the one with the clicker, so we get to focus on my stuff. And then our strategic use of research partnerships to impact the communities across Georgia. And what that looks like is we're going to define person-centered supervision, we're going to apply forecasting to person-centered supervision, we're going to interpret some criminal justice outcomes together, as well as recognize some factors to consider for strategic collaboration between practitioners and research partners. All right, so it's my responsibility as a practitioner to make sure the researchers that I'm working with have a good understanding of the context in which our work takes place. So in addition to the mission, vision, and values, I always give them a little bit of background of what community supervision in Georgia looks like. And there's not going to be a test on these, but just I'm giving you some examples. Like one, I need you to know that we have the largest supervision population in the world. I'm not bragging, but it is something that affects our data, that affects our decisions, that affects our strategies. So, for instance, in the United States, 1 in 66 people across the nation are on some form of supervision, whether it's probation or parole. In Georgia, that ratio goes down to 1 in 23. So that has some very important impacts if you're wanting to come in and research the community supervision in Georgia, right? I also need you to know that there's a myth going around that probation revocations drive prison populations. In Georgia, the data just does not support this, probably because it's illegal to revoke somebody for probation without a new offense. So of the 198,000 people plus that were supervised in 2021, less than 1% of them had their probation term revoked in state prison, which is very contradictory to some of the...
Sorry, what is probation revocation?
Thank you for saying that. Probation revocation is when someone violates, they get a new charge or something like that, and then they go back in front of the judge, and the judge essentially takes away that some or all of that community portion. So we're talking felony probation, so it's a crime punishable by prison that you're allowed to serve in the community in lieu of prison.
Okay.
So what they're saying is you messed up, so we're going to revoke a year or all of that community time to the prison system. Is that cleared up?
Yeah, and I have a question on the previous slide. Is that adults or adult of the whole?
This is adults. Mm-hmm.
The denominator is adults. So.
Yes, all adults. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then another reason why do people have their probation terms revoked? Like I said, there's some literature out there claiming that it's because of technical violations, which may be the case some places, but in Georgia it's not. The majority of, as you can see here, the majority of the people that have their probation revoked is for new charges. And like I said, and I'm sorry if I'm glossing over some of the technical terms. I'm just kind of giving you some examples that if you're coming in and studying my population, I feel like I have a responsibility to catch you up to speed what's going on, right? And that's going to help you form hypotheses. It's going to help you letting me know what data you need from me and all that kind of stuff. So I just feel like it's a great understand what people are about as far as identities, as far as our agency identities, but then all of a sudden start getting some context in which we're going to be doing this work together in. So that's why I want to share that with you. So person-centered supervision. So those are some cool numbers and graphs, but we're talking about people, not math. So in justice-involved people have too often received the worst society has to offer. A lot of them have grown up with street violence and underfunded schools. A disproportionate number are dealing with addiction, mental illness, and homelessness. Yet, instead of addressing these underlying issues, we tend to brand people as criminals, remove them from society, and then place restrictions on their ability to work or receive services. So to overcome this dilemma, we've developed in Georgia the person-centered supervision model as a way to improve services for our clients, the people on supervision. What is person-centered supervision? Person-centered supervision recognizes people as unique individuals with their own strengths, needs, and goals. And it leverages research and technology so that we can prioritize those activities that promote success among justice-involved persons, such as tailoring services to meet their individual needs. So in short, this is a strategy for putting principles into practice. Which isn't that what we're trying to do with academic and practitioner partnerships? We're trying to bring that theory into reality. So this person-centered supervision, I said at the beginning, it's my work, but I can't do it by myself. I have to rely heavily on strategic collaborations with people who are honestly a lot smarter than I am.
Do you have like an example of what this actually looks like for an individual?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get too much in the weeds on community supervision, but we are going to talk about an example as far as our forecasting tool that we're using and how we're using the elements of person-centered supervision to make decisions about how we're crafting our forecasting tool. So if you don't mind holding off on that, let's see if we get it captured. Okay? So, when we're talking about principles, being able to forecast someone's risk to reoffend and then matching that risk to the appropriate level of intensity for the services that we're providing is at the heart of evidence-based supervision practices. So we recently partnered with a research institute to create a brand new assessment tool, a brand new forecasting tool to predict risk and better align with our person-centered supervision model. And it's really funny. So this project was birthed out of us winning a $2 million grant to explore the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning in community supervision settings. So we get together, me and the researchers get together, we do all my hoopla, giving them the context, getting to know each other, and then they go do their thing for a couple months. And then they call me up, they're like, hey Nick, we got good news and bad news. I'm like, all right? The good news is that we were able to slightly improve the predictability of your old logistic regression models. I was like, all right, what's the bad news? They said, we got no clue how we're doing it. So, we had to make a very important collective decision. Should I take a slight improvement of predictability and give away all my explainability? Because my research partners knew what I was about, they already knew my answer. I have to answer to legislators. I have to answer to media outlets and constituents. I can't get rid of explainability. So we decided to toss the artificial intelligence and machine learning and stick to the same logistic regression model that I think we've definitely done my entire career, and I think they were doing it 20, 30 years before my career started. But we did make some improvements looking through that person-centered supervision paradigm that I'd like to talk to you about. So what I'd like to do is go through the elements of person-centered supervision and then talk to you about how we made some decisions to improve our forecasting tool based on those elements. So the 4 elements of person-centered supervision is: 1 is time. It takes time to deliver quality supervision. 2 is relationships. The relationship between an officer and the person on their caseload is very important for successful outcomes. Research shows us that over and over again. 3rd is dialogue. You need to have a dialogical two-way relationship going for it to be effective. And finally, focusing on intersections, addressing those barriers to success where someone's community supervision status and their other issues such as mental illness, addiction, poverty meet. So you start getting an idea of what person-centered supervision looks like. So first, time. So officers get into this field because they want to help people. They want to serve their communities. But it's not long before they're hit in the face with bureaucracy, with public scrutiny, with media sensationalism. And these good intentions very quickly distort into poor performance, into burnout. In fact, the top 3 stressors for officers is excessive paperwork, unrealistic deadlines, and large caseloads. And we got the biggest caseloads. All 3 of those stressors coalesce into one problem: time. Officers don't have enough time to spend with their clients. So, needing to understand this problem, as opposed to just using my gut reaction and performance strategies, we partnered with a researcher to conduct a comprehensive workload analysis. And I'll be happy to talk with you more about this workload analysis afterwards if anybody's interested. But for the sake of time and out of fear of boring you to death, the big takeaway is that bottom blue line on the bottom. We found that officers were having 66% of their time eaten up by administrative activities, not working with the people on their caseloads, which is our mission, right? So they're spending 66% of their time not working on their mission. So we took this information that these researchers were able to impartially give to us and came with some strategies to recoup time. So we started using video interactions. We started between officers and clients. We started hiring court specialists who weren't officers, who weren't having to go through the same certifications, but they could replace officers in court, and then those court officers that were sitting in court could go out to the field. And these are just some examples of some strategies that we did trying to chip away at these time drains. And we're seeing some measurable gains. So before the workload analyses and rolling out those strategies, we were averaging about 6.5 minutes per officer-client interaction. And now we're at about 23 minutes. And because you guys are all researchers in here, you're like, how the hell do you know that, Nick? Because they wear body camera footages. So I can pull the metadata on how long their camera comes on when the conversation starts and goes off when they leave. So I can pull the metadata from that. So it's good for you to know if you're going to come work with us, right? So this idea of time for officers, right? So it's important for us to think about who we're spending time on, right? That's why forecasting is so important for community supervision. With large caseloads and excessive administrative tasks, we have to focus on those people with the highest risk and the highest needs. Those ones that we're going to be able to make the biggest impact. However, traditional forecast models in our field tend to look at criminal history variables the same no matter when they occur. So we incorporated this decay effect because there's something fundamentally different about someone who just committed a crime and someone who committed that same crime 26 years ago. So what we did is we made a decay point of 5 years is what the models show us. We were starting to have some significant differences where if someone committed a crime 5 years or later, it was weighted much lighter than someone who committed that same crime within the last 5 years. And that has some pretty substantial impact on our risk scores. Okay? Time is not inherently good, right? Just giving the officers more time isn't going to do anything. It's what we do with that recoup time that matters, right? Are they using that time to implement those evidence-based practices that research shows us is going to improve outcomes? So that's what we're focusing on. So when I was an officer in the field, I was partnering with a guy named Willie Mitchell. So me and Willie would ride around all day, seeing all the people on each other's caseloads. And there was this one young man who was really struggling with his probation. He kept getting arrested, going to jail, getting on different officers' caseloads, losing his job, moving all over the place. Like he was having a tough time. Finally, he got on Willie's caseload. And instead of just going down, laying down the law like every other officer was trying to do on this young kid, Willie took a different approach. He used compassion. And after just a couple meaningful conversations, Willie discovered that all this negative behavior stemmed from frustration and embarrassment caused by the fact that this guy couldn't read. So Willie took the time to enroll him in a literacy program. The guy was able to get a job and successfully complete his supervision. Unfortunately, not all officers are like Willie. If they were, we probably wouldn't be partnering with researchers to develop these fancy forecast tools. So we have to constantly, and during these collaborations, we have to constantly reinforce the importance of relationships and improving outcomes. Here's some of the logic behind this. And if anybody's interested, I have cited the references on some of this research, if you care. So the quality of officer and supervisee relationships is associated with improved outcomes, lower violation rates, reduced recidivism, less drug use. So we've trained every officer in enhanced supervision program as a strategy for transforming interaction dynamics between officers and their clients from just simple surveillance and compliance to actually building trust and shared understanding, what we call a working alignment. So we're actually expecting them to build rapport and build relationships with the people on their caseloads now that we've been able to clear up some time for them to do so, right? And since the implementation of our model, I told you about the enhanced supervision program, there's been a notable uptick in the use of those ESP skills. So in 2022, officers were using these skills at maybe 4% of their interactions. But if you remember earlier, I showed you that they were only spending about 6 minutes on an interaction. So they didn't have time to build rapport and use these skills. And now they're almost up to 40% of their interactions using these skills. Yes?
Is that like 40% of the people, or is it 40% of the interactions?
So the way I operationalize this is if you see that person, no matter how many times you've seen them, we just turn it dichotomous. You saw them or you didn't.
So it's a
during
total.
one of those interactions, did you use an ESP skill?
Okay. Thank you.
That way, if it's a phone call and they're checking in or something later on, following up, the officers aren't feeling like they've got to be robotic and go through these steps. Good question.
Question: did all of these changes occur simultaneously in terms of time spent going up at the same time that the enhanced supervised program skills, implementing them happening at the same time? Did you run into kind of multi-collinearity issues in terms of teasing out the effects of one thing versus the other?
Yeah, and that's a really good point to make. And I'm giving descriptive statistics. I don't know, I can't necessarily tell you what was causing what, because I wouldn't be able to measure it, because all these things were happening at the same time. Because you got to remember, as that time went up, so did the use of these skills went up. But also, if you remember, one of the ways we got the time up was by allowing officers to do video interactions, right? So now all of a sudden you don't have to worry about the dog barking, you don't have to worry about the neighbor looking at you and all this stuff. So officers are more likely to do the video interaction. So what's causing what, I can't quite tell you, but that's why.
You made a comment earlier that when officers were spending those either 6 or 6.5 minutes with their clients, that you kind of only have time for the highest risk people. So I'm wondering then, given more time, do you really see more time with the highest risk people, or do you see more time also on, say, some of the lower risk people, but arguably some of the lower risk people might be cases where you're kind of more likely to have success in some way. So it's kind of did you start switching who you spend time on, or just more time on the same people?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And no, we don't have the answer to that yet.
Oh, okay.
No, but the fact that you would pose that question I think is really relevant to this conversation. It's like, yeah, that's the kind of things that when we're talking about these strategic collaborations, we can come in and look. So if you understand what's going on, then yes, we would expect that time for interaction to go up more for the higher risk people. But I don't know that.
Okay.
Very cool. So we're talking about, let's go back and talk about the iDRACs. I don't want to get too far away from our forecasting tool because of the nature of this conference, and because I know where most of your interest lies. So I strongly believe that evidence-based practice is a verb, not a noun, right? This is something we do, not something we have. So we have to constantly be evaluating, asking these new questions, and then make adjustments based on our findings. Like we talk about Willie and that guy on his caseload. I mean, we're talking about problems from struggling with illiteracy, right? Manifesting in all these different complicated issues that Willie and this guy were working on together. Now that kind of complicated issue, you can't code in an algorithm, right? However, our previous forecasting tool was static. It had no way of accounting for supervision progress or those relationship dynamics. So we created some dynamic measures, both protective and risk factors, that are constantly being recalculated every night at midnight as they change, so that as those variables change, the risk score changes every day. And that way, people have the opportunity to positively influence their supervision level, which gives the officer and the client a common goal that they can work toward. So, like I said, the relationships have to be a two-way street. If you just have a one-way conversation with officers, telling people what to do and then dropping the hammer when they don't do what they're told, you're not going to make any headway in relationship building. Dr. Ernest Ciroli, anybody familiar with his work? Okay, well, he's an economic developer, and in his first book, he talks about one of his early assignments. He had to go to Zambia. So he gets there and he sees the fertile ground and the warm climate. He's like, I know, we'll do farming. I'll teach them to farm. So they plant zucchinis and tomatoes, and the harvest is growing beautifully. Right before everything's ready to pick, about 300 hippos come out of the jungle and eat everything. And Dr. Ciroli's taken back. He just says, my God, the hippos. And the Zambians say, yeah, that's why we don't have agriculture here. Dr. Ciroli says, well, why didn't you say anything? The Zambians politely reply, you never asked. So the point of that story, according to Dr. Ciroli, is if you want to help somebody, shut up and listen. So we're trying to do that at DCS by promoting dialogue between us and the people we supervise. So there's a theoretical framework called procedural justice for treating people with fairness and respect throughout the legal system. And a core principle of that framework is incorporating voice, or allowing people to tell their side of the story. And it is associated with improved criminal justice outcomes. So not only is it more humane to give people a chance to tell their side of the story, you actually can improve public safety with it, according to research. So we're opening dialogue between us and the people we supervise by giving opportunities to provide meaningful feedback. So I talked to you guys earlier about the use of video interactions, right? Well, we really ramped that up during COVID. Now, this was a safe and convenient option for us, but we had no clue how this technology was being received on the other side. So we sent out a pulse survey to everybody on our caseloads who were using the technology to see what they thought about it. And the results were overwhelmingly supportive of the technology. So 82% of people agreed that it was a convenient way for them to talk to their officer. while 84% said that they felt comfortable talking to their officer in this format, and 83% of people agreed that they could still have meaningful conversations with their officer during a video interaction as opposed to face-to-face. So this is good. And we haven't dialed back, even after the pandemic, we haven't dialed back on video interactions yet because it seems to be good for everybody. However, if these were negative results, then we would have had to make some adjustments. Wish I had a negative one to show you, but I don't. So when we're talking about dialogue calls for us to take the time and effort to understand the circumstances of a person's life now, not just their status in the eyes of the system or just consider their criminal record. But traditionally, forecast models use the same risk model in community supervision throughout their entire supervision term, whether it's day 1 or whether it's year 8. So one of the other upgrades we made to our assessment tool is we incorporate these time series models. And what that means is that depending on what period you are in your supervision, without experiencing the outcome, which, by the way, our outcome is just, I told you, it's a logistic regression model. Our outcome is simply a felony arrest or a violent misdemeanor arrest. So because research shows us that those first 90 days are where a person's the most vulnerable. If they're going to fail, it's most likely going to be in those first 90 days. So those first 90 days are statistically different than someone who's been on longer than 90 days. So we're using a different model for those first 90 days. And if that person goes through 90 days without experiencing one of the outcomes, if they survive, then they go to our next model, which is for 270 days. And if they go through 270 days, then they go to our third and final model, which is a year-plus model of supervision. So we have completely different models with completely different algorithms getting applied to the person depending on what time in supervision they are, which is very different than how we've done things in the past. And if someone experiences one of the outcomes, they may have to go to jail, they may, however the court decides to handle that arrest, when they come back to supervision, then they start back in the 90-day model and stay in it until they go 90 days without experiencing the outcome. So, fast forward a couple years in my career, and I was an assistant chief in Atlanta. And I'll never forget on one of I think it was like the second or third day, 2 officers come to me with a guy in handcuffs. And they're like, "Hey, chief, we got to take this guy downtown." I'm like, "Okay, why?" They said, "Well, we have a warrant for his arrest." I said, "Well, that's good. I guess if you're arresting somebody, you need to have a warrant." I said, "No, what's the warrant for?" And they said, "Failure to report." So I looked at both the officers. I looked at the guy in handcuffs. I said, "Failure to report, so you couldn't find him?" And they said, "Yeah, exactly." I said, "I found him. He's right here." But because these officers were so hardwired to handle the warrant through the jail system, they weren't even using critical thinking, right? So these officers were bright, well-intentioned officers, and they wouldn't object to the notion that locking someone up for something so trivial could have some serious negative consequences, right? When confined, people are removed from their loved ones, exposed to violence, and stigmatized. These are the kinds of things that perpetuate crime, not prevent it. But yet these officers were so hardwired by tradition to do things how they've always done in the office, it wasn't even registering them when I was asking them to critically think. Like, could we not just give them a curfew? Verbal warning? Talk to him something like that. He hasn't hurt anybody. He hasn't done anything. But and then after I talked to him for a few minutes, they were willing to say the change. But my point is that if we want to foster success, if we want to strengthen our communities, we have to take into account the social context in which crime occurs. We have to challenge the status quo. We can't just do things the way we've always done by tradition. And that goes for people like me on the practitioner side, and it also goes for people who I'm working with on the research side as we're developing our forecast models. And here's how some of the logic goes for that. So just involved people are more likely to experience mental illness, homelessness, and unemployment, and addiction. We've talked about that. And addressing these issues has been linked to meaningful reductions in recidivism. It improves public safety, right? Like when you're trying to simultaneously navigate mental health treatment and comply with the conditions of your probation or parole, a strong relationship with your officer is an invaluable resource for success. Again, although homelessness is not considered a criminogenic risk factor, there's a well-established association between housing and crime. So let's take that for an example. So if we're addressing housing needs, we should see measurable gains in criminal justice outcomes. So you were asking earlier about how I operationalize these performance measures. So if someone has an open housing need, we expect an officer can't house the person, right? But we do expect them to talk to them about it. We do expect them to link them to resources. We do expect them to make referrals, follow up on those referrals. So when we first started this person-centered supervision model, if someone had an open housing need, which means they were either unstable residents or homeless, our officers were only talking to them about it 8% of the time. But when we started rolling out this model, immediately, within just a year, it went up to 31%. And again, all this stuff was happening at the same time. So is it the ESP? Is it the time per interaction? I can't quite say. So we love to toss around words like evidence-based and the research says. But I find myself in these situations often thinking, what is the base? And I think that as researchers, as practitioners, we have to be ready to put up the research that's driving our decision at any moment. Otherwise, we're going to continue falling these same traps of making decisions by tradition or by measuring what can easily be measured. I'll tell you a strong example of that has been kind of a pet peeve of mine throughout my entire career is drug testing. It's real easy in my database to look at drug testing. Is it positive or negative, right? And then our previous forecast model used whether a drug test was positive or negative to determine risk. Well, because I had a strong partnership with our researcher, I told him that's BS, right? Our officers drug test for cause. People aren't systematically drug tested. So the data is automatically skewed. And by for cause, I mean our officers drug test when they have reason to believe that substance use is an issue. So the absence of drug testing may very well be an indicator of positive progress. So we put that in our models, they did some testing, and lo and behold, in two of the models, the 270-day model and the 365-day model, the absence of drug testing was a significant protective factor. So, even though I've talked a lot about addressing needs and the intersections in community supervision and other social issues, at the end of the day, legislators, the public, they want to know how's it going. And they want to know how's it going by arrest, by successful completion. So you and your academic partner, you and your practitioner partner need to be able to always report out on what's going on. So although I haven't done the intensive statistical analyses I need to do to show correlation and causation with some of these strategies that I've shared with you and how our assessment tool plays into that, I do know that our arrests are going down. So we're not hurting anything as far as the bottom line. And even though I think that these are very small ways to look at it, especially with the in-depth conversation we've had so far, and I do know that our successful completions are at 87%. So of the people who complete supervision, 87% are completing it in the communities, not being revoked to prison, which prior to doing this, we were hovering around 83%. So we're trending in the right direction. So being able to do this before, and the reason I say this is so important, is because a lot of times when you're partnering with a researcher, research takes time, right? And I then called to the carpet and tried to explain to legislators, like, we have a research partner looking into this, they should have a report for you. When's the report going to be ready? About 3 years. So we need to be able to give these kind of performance monitoring numbers to kind of give your researchers, if you come from the practitioner side, to give your researchers some top cover. So they're not putting any pressure on having to rush through the results.
Is this percentage measured as like a percent of what? For the arrests in terms of?
So of the people we supervised, 20% of them were arrested. And then the following year, of the people we supervised, only 17% of them were arrested.
What does this look like in absolute terms? Is it also going down, or are the numbers comparable because of population changes, or?
In absolute terms, it is a smaller population. That's actually why. So yeah, the arrests are way down because arrests are down. The number of people who are unsupervised are down. We still have a backlog of people who haven't even gotten put on supervision from COVID. Which I'm not even sure how some people are going to handle it. So yeah, the absolute terms, it looked really good for us, but I felt that would be a little deceiving. So I did it by of the people that we supervised. This is the arrest.
Would it pretty much be the same story of kind of if rather than focusing on arrest, we focus on convictions, with the idea that maybe not everyone who gets arrested actually gets some kind of punishment attached to that, or kind of is it a very effective baseline to just focus on arrests here?
So this is why I call recidivism the R word. I hate it. I like to talk about addressing needs. I like to talk about the things we can control. Because you're very much, arrest is the earliest part of the criminal justice system.
Mm-hmm.
But conviction, you have to bake in court processing time, which takes a long time.
Okay.
Your sample goes down huge. Because
Okay.
some people, it takes the courts 1.5 years, 2 years
Sure.
to even process their case.
Okay.
So, yes, that would be a better accurate measure, but that court lag time creates a problem when I'm reporting out, which is why, when I can, I hold the wolves at bay and tell them to look at the researchers who do a much better job of unpacking that stuff.
Okay.
But I just show them kind of this first initial thing.
Yeah.
And another problem with that is, there's, in Georgia, like everywhere else in the U.S., there's racial disparities at every step of the criminal justice process. So who gets arrested, there's racial disparities there, but then it compounds, it gets even worse when you look at the percentage of arrests that turn into a conviction. So there's a lot to unpack there, and when you start getting that complicated, I prefer to have a researcher where we can really, really get to the bottom of it. As opposed, because sometimes these descriptive administrative data can cause some problems and be misleading, and I have to be very careful not to do that. So I keep it as simple as I can.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yes.
That's good. One of you guys have a question?
Did you have a question? No. Oh, I was gonna also ask. So, in part of your logistic regression model, were there any? What are some of the other factors that you are controlling for to kind of tease out the effects of the actual changes that you've made compared to other things that may be impacting the target variable?
So we're looking at things like employment. So I told you about the dynamic factors. So our previous assessment, looked at whether or not you were employed when you started supervision, and then it kind of stuck with your score throughout supervision as a static measure. But now, because we're calculating it every night, if you get a job, it changes. So addressing employment needs, that's something that we're doing just like addressing housing needs. So with the person-centered supervision model, if someone gets a job or if someone completes treatment, those are two variables that will actually, they're significant protective factors, so they'll actually lower your score.
Has there been any changes in policing policy that over the time period of interest that you're studying? That
Yeah.
could have an effect?
So that's one of the reasons too. I try to arrests. There's a bit. Arrests are down among the police. Period. So, which is why I do the proportion. But that's why I try to focus on the things that we can control, which is addressing housing needs when they're there, or whether or not you're using those effective communication skills. I try my best to kind of insulate us from stuff like policing and sentencing trends that we've got no control over. Right? Yeah.
You have a lot of information and domain knowledge about how this works, and it's kind of breakthrough that other people don't have. I'm wondering if you've drawn that out and kind of if your hypothesis of what causes what, that let's say causality experts that are usually they can prove that.
Yeah.
Because it's a very simple way to share your kind of hypothesis and your knowledge, and somebody can just see that graph and then test it or whatever data that they have access to.
Certainly interested in doing that. It's very cool.
Do you have more slides?
What's that?
Are you, I can't tell if you're still going. I just had some like overview stuff for the end.
That's okay. Well, let's get to that.
Well, I don't know if just a couple resources in Washington State. Have you heard of Washington State Institute of Public Policy?
No.
So we have this research organization through one of our colleges, and one of their main tasks is cataloging evidence-based practices to stop recidivism. And if you just go to their website, even they have really good outline of all their findings and all the possible things that can reduce recidivism.
Do you mind not running out of here so that I can write that
Yeah,
down?
yeah. And then could you go back to the slide that showed all those risk factors for the
Which one?
that one. Okay, so mental illness, homelessness, unemployment, addiction. Our research and data analysis office in our Department of Social and Health Services created almost the same kind of risk score that you've created for, I guess, recidivism, to use the word, for which clients are going to generate the highest healthcare costs in our state Medicaid program or in long-term care or developmental disability. And it's basically those exact pieces: homelessness, mental illness, unemployment. And the idea is they create a risk score, just like you do. It's called PRISM. I don't know what that acronym means. And then they can use that risk score to target direct facilitation of that client in the program to try to help them meet their needs on any of those factors so that they can avoid ending up in the emergency room, which generates a lot of costs, or avoid ending up in long-term care. Same kind of thing, but on the healthcare side. So it's these problems, these social problems, don't just hit in criminal justice. They spread across.
Right. No, very cool. I appreciate you sharing that. No, and I think that gives good support to what I've been trying to point out to people. Is like this is much bigger than just community supervision. Just a lot of times things kind of get default until it gets put in front of us. Yeah.
Yeah, so just thinking about the fact that you're working with a logistic regression model, have you tried using a survival model, which could also work with the dichotomous outcome here, but also kind of add some information to kind of start helping you estimate, okay, for people that fit this certain set of characteristics, what is our estimate for kind of on average how long they generally go before we might expect more people to have some kind of failure in the process. I think here that could be a really helpful set of models to consider for this kind of analysis.
I'll talk about it with my team. Yeah. I don't know if they've looked at that or not.
Okay.
You may have said this, but what is the application of the forecast? Like you're forecasting outcomes. Is it for like individuals, or are you aggregating that to inform? What's the application of the forecast? Where does it go?
It's for the individuals.
So
For us, it's a resource management tool, right? So you get a score that goes through 1 through 10, and then the highest 10% scores go on high level supervision.
Gotcha. So then all of those factors help you understand how to help that person?
Right. Yeah, so if someone lowers their risk score, then the next highest risk person in the queue that was not on a high level of supervision will get bumped up to a high level of supervision.
Sounds like PRISM.
Yeah, it's just like PRISM.
Yeah.
So PRISM does it as well?
Well, PRISM is that's our social services
And I
risk
think-
score thing, and then they direct the care coordinators to the highest risk.
No, that's a really good point. I appreciate you pointing that out. I'm actually going to make a note to make sure I clarify that in the front end next time I talk about this. But yeah, sometimes I take for granted because I usually justice arenas talking about this stuff, so I take for granted what people know.
And so that score then is generated daily or weekly?
Yeah, so someone gets a job and the risk is lower than someone else who may have not done anything will go up and get a higher level of supervision.
Does the client know their score?
Huh?
Does the client know their score?
Yes, and they
Yeah.
make factors that are driving the score.
Do they try to get a better score?
They do.
Yeah.
The problem is officers try to manipulate it.
Yeah, of course.
So that's the problem with it. That's been the problem with the transparency. It's like you want the officers to understand it and buy into it. But the same token, this happens and it's human nature.
Sure.
They try to find
they-
ways to.
What do you mean?
Are they trying to manipulate it in terms of they want more of their clients to be successful, or are they manipulating because
Yeah.
they want people to stay in the system?
They want, because I told you, like, so if someone goes to a low risk, then the next highest risk person goes up to high. So someone who's at a high level of supervision is a lot more work. So that next person who's high, it's not done on the caseload basis. It's done on the individual basis throughout the whole state. So if you get someone to low risk, it's less work for you. And then chances are, we have 1,500 officers. Chances are the next person that goes up is not going to be on your caseload.
I'm
And
sorry.
this isn't like a big problem, but we do see
No,
it. sometimes.
so some people like to kind of try to game the system to
Well,
make.
you can't help it, right?
Yeah.
Well, no.
Once you start measuring things, people start trying
Right.
to, that's just the way it is.
Absolutely. I'm a former teacher, so I really like that you're combining the data analysis, the large scale, like database decisions, and then you're personalizing it and giving everybody an opportunity for context, because it's the kind of thing that ideally would be happening in schools as well. But I think that's probably the most effective way to help people.
So,
Better
and I appreciate you noticing, but that's why I'm very deliberate on weaving in the stories and doing the professional identity and stuff, so that we can keep track of, like, yes, we have data, we are measuring stuff, but that's getting these numbers to go where we want them to go is not the mission, right? And that's always tough.
Are the officers evaluated on their effectiveness at reducing the scores of their?
No.
Okay.
No. They're evaluated on, like, say someone has an employment need, they're evaluated on whether or not they address that employment
Oh, that's
need.
great.
So
That's
they may
outcome.
check the box to say they address the employment need, but then we have a quality assurance team that comes in and looks at the body camera footage and will try to preserve that data integrity.
Like sampling.
Yeah. But needless to say, that's kind of time consuming. So.
So I'm interested in any kind of variation that you're seeing in this program. So you brought up REST earlier as something that of course has all kinds of implications throughout the system, but also in terms of whether there are any particular nuances that you're seeing by people with different kinds of immigration status. So, like, coming out of the Office of Immigration Statistics in DHS, I spend the overwhelming majority of my time focusing on analyzing trends in unauthorized migration. I'm assuming that if your office is working with anyone that has different kinds of challenges with their immigration status, that could become kind of its own special issue that you're trying to work through.
Yeah, and that data is tricky for us.
Okay.
Usually, a lot of times, by the time that data gets to us, like ICE is involved and stuff like that. So by that point, they're usually in some like sort of administrative matter.
Okay.
So, like, we're rarely supervising somebody while they're doing those issues.
Okay.
So we haven't seen anything in that, but it is in the model. We didn't see anything.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for the presentation. This seems a really good approach to try and help people once they're already in the system. How are you or your colleagues looking at applying this to people before they've actually committed offences, and to what risk factors might you be identifying to help people who look like they are at risk of doing that?
So the short answer is that's out of my lane. No, but what we've recently done, so we're actually in the middle of talking to a pilot. So we're talking with the Superior Court judge, the head district attorney, and the head public defender. So those are kind of the three big core players in the U.S. And we're trying to run a pilot where basically we do this risk assessment before the person is convicted or anything like that to see, like, is this valuable information? So we're not making recommendations on whether or not the person should go on probation. We're not making recommendations on whether or not the person will flee, if you give them bond, anything like that. We're just basically giving you almost like a reference case plan. Like, if this person was on supervision, this is what it would look like. To see if that has any value to the courts. So we're piloting right now, and we're going in with a research partner so they can look at all this stuff, talk to all the people. But we are trying to at least share that information because it wouldn't be a lot of work for us to do that because our officers are already in the court, or we have the court specialists already in the court recording all that information for the people that get on supervision. So the people that are maybe just being arraigned and not being put on supervision yet, we're thinking that might be an intercept point that we could give this information to the attorneys, both the prosecutor and the public defender. Something we're looking into, but it's very early stages. Don't want to go back to doing pre-sentence investigations.
Any other questions? We might have a minute or two if anyone else has questions.
Thank you so much for all the questions. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for this thought-provoking dialogue and your really terrific presentation and for your time with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Feel free to take my contact information if you think there's anything I can do for you.
I just appreciate it.